Hi, everybody. Thank you all for coming. It's a good time to go ahead and get started. I'd like to start with just a little bit of housekeeping. We've all been having our virtual meetings for the last year and some change. And so, but just as an introduction to ourselves and others, if you would in the chat, put your name, your pronouns, where you are right now, the organization and position that you hold. And if you could also tell us, what is your favorite animal in the climate justice movement? Another bit of housekeeping while you're doing that. We expect this session to be interactive, so make good use of the chat. We also want to hear from you as we move along. So if anything resonates with you, go ahead and give us a +1, +100, +1000, or if something misses the mark, go ahead and give us your negative ones and 100s as well. Stephanie. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today, our takeaways will be our slide deck and our messaging rubric. We'll show examples of messaging and, the major contributors of this message where they may or may not have missed the mark. So let's go ahead, Stephanie and I, we're going to introduce ourselves. My name is Kim Sutterth, and I am the Virginia Organizing Manager for Mothers Out Front.
Hi, y'all. My name is Stephanie Bowman, and I'm the National Movements and Campaigns Manager for Mothers Out Front, which is just fancy for I support the 45 states where we don't have deep organizing.
Thank you for that. And today, again, we're going to talk about climate change and the ways that messaging both humanizes and sometimes dishumanizes frontline communities and the folks who are most likely to be impacted. We evaluated several national campaigns, including our own, and we'll discuss all of our messaging tactics and their intended audiences. We'll look at different campaigns and consider whether there are takeaways for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in those communities in urban preservation and in environmental justice. So Stephanie, did we get anyone who shared their favorite animal in the chat?
It looks like we have whales and bees and frog.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I'll tell you that for me anyway, whales are my favorite animals. But as we examine the messaging, as we think of in the context of environmental justice, we want to think about how the use of animals in general or our messaging tends to move the spotlight away from people and focuses on animals in particular, almost removing people, and especially those people who would be directly impacted from that conversation. And I'm going to pass the mic to Stephanie.
Thank you for that, Kim. So we demand climate justice. And in this demand, we have to be very transparent. It has to be rooted in self-reflection. And so as far as giving this context and a disclaimer, as we go through some of our coalition partners or our allies, or even some of our fellow climate organizations, it's important to know that this is a place from making it implicit. Oh, I think that's wrong. of making the implicit explicit. There we go. And just being honest that if our messaging hits the mark, what can we do differently? How can we make this work really transformational? So I just wanted to give us that context and that disclaimer before we get into the juice of this. Okay, so let's just talk about BIPOC. So for those of you who know, because you joined this session, BIPOC means Black, Indigenous, people of color. But as we all know, that term is broad, right? Like when we think about who that encompasses and what it includes, Black is folks who descended from Africa, right? That can be folks who may still be there. They may be British Blacks. They may be folks who descended from slavery, Black, right? But Indigenous, there are Indigenous people globally, all over the world. And so when we think about this term, it is including all of these countries, right? Some of these continents. And then we have people of color, right? This larger umbrella term. And so when we talk about BIPOC messaging, we have to be explicit that this term in itself is very problematic, right? Like we're looping all these folks together as if our climate priorities are going to be the same. And they're not. And that's okay. And so I believe I pass this back to Kim about what is our poster child for the climate movement? And what do you think about reframing it?
And go ahead and put your answer in the chat if you'd like to share. When you're thinking about those folks, both our furry friends as well as people, when you're thinking about climate change, shouldn't we be centering solutions versus animals in general? And Stephanie, I'm just going to pause for just a moment. I lost my my screen, so just give me one moment while I recover it. I'm sorry, Stephanie, I'm not able to find it. If you could back me up for just a couple of slides while I look for it.
Okay. For those of you who are asking questions in the chat, the platform that we're using doesn't allow us as facilitators to respond to you in the chat. So we're not being responsive. We definitely see you, but we can't reply. It doesn't allow us to. Okay. Well, I'll just move forward, Kim, and when you find the screen, just let me know. Of course. Give me 1 second. All right. So, when we talk about BIPOC messaging, Kim and I were like, okay, where do we miss the mark? What type of ways can we hold ourselves accountable and hold our allies accountable, hold our coalition partners accountable, and like what this looks like? And so we broke it down into these 5 segments. So if this was your messaging notebook and you had your little tabs on the side, this is what we would recommend as far as going through your own messaging and reflecting. So the first question is really around the who. So who or what are we protecting? And what people would be most impacted? And if it's polar bears, if it's people, if it's a particular type of animal, if it's people, which people are we prioritizing? And so then the other series of questions is, here's what we know, right? We know that Black, Indigenous, and brown and low wealth folks will be affected first and worst. So our messaging should reflect that. So the second tab is why urgency? It's important for us to know that urgency is rooted in white supremacy culture, okay? And our sense of urgency in this work is intrinsically tied to the sense of urgency of the climate, right? Like our earth, our planet is burning, we're in droughts. But we also have to know that folks who experience oppression already feel a sense of urgency. So when we're talking about activism, we're talking about engaging people to get involved and wanting to fight for themselves, it's a very tight rope that we're walking in regards to letting folks know what's going on in the sense of urgency, but not adding to all the layers of oppression that we already feel.
Stephanie,
And
my notes have come up now. So
perfect, because it's your example for this one. So I wanted to pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you. As we were talking about urgency, I wanted to bring up where I live. I live in the southeastern part of Virginia, in Norfolk. And when we think about urgency, one thing that I hear over and over in the messaging around climate change has been our flooding and how that affects our military bases. In Norfolk, we have the largest naval base in the world. And because of our flooding issues, more often than not, when there is even a mildly heavy rain, and even sometimes at high tide, it can be difficult for our military personnel to leave their homes and get to the bases. And that presents basically a security issue. If our military personnel cannot get to the ships, then what's the point in having a base here in Norfolk? And so every so often, there's this great concern that we might lose our bases. The military accounts for about 47% of our economic viability here in Norfolk. So from an economic standpoint, if we were to lose our bases because of the flooding issue, the city of Norfolk essentially becomes a ghost town. So what I've heard in the messaging around the urgency has been, we have to do something about this flooding because we don't want to lose our bases. So the urgency seems to be centered around the loss of income, and even sometimes the loss of property. But where are the people in that messaging? Where is the empathy for them? You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So on this part of this tab of the notebook, we want to talk about how are we interacting with power? Who are the stars of the messaging? And how are they interacting with power? Are they begging for help? Are they resisting oppression? Are they building power together? And the next one, Stephanie. And what are the images of power that are being displayed? What does the appearance of the people say about your message? And what message is that sending out to the people? Are they solving their own problems? And if not, who is? And finally, what is the end goal? And what does that look like? If I want you to ask yourself, as you're cultivating your messages, the end goal, is it accessible for everyone? Does it challenge those who are in power currently? And also, do they conflict with the cultural norms of the community that your message is hoping to either connect with or portray? Now, in this next slide, this is where we start to talk about ourselves. Again, Stephanie and I, we organize with an organization called Mothers Out Front. And I'm hoping that we can show a video, but we were having some technical issues a moment before. Stephanie, do you want to see if we can try it again? And if it doesn't work, we'll...
Yeah, it's making my computer lag. I wouldn't be able to manage screen share.
Okay. Well, our apologies. I think that, it's important that as we are looking at other organizations and their messaging, Stephanie and I thought it was important that we look at our own. I'm happy to share a link to the video directly with folks and maybe even hear from you later on. What did you think of it? Think about it using this rubric that we've created. And if you want, Stephanie, we can go ahead and go to the next one. So we retrieved this image from the website of NRDC. And our question to you all is, as you take a moment to look at it, go ahead and reflect back to our earlier rubric, especially who in this messaging, who exactly are we protecting? Is there a discussion about the people who would be most impacted? And what's the urgency? And while we're looking at that, and I'd like us to also think about included in this messaging where it talks about we are on the front lines. And I wondered, who is the we that are on the front lines? And is that message accurately portrayed here? This messaging talks about representation in courtrooms. Last I heard, polar bears don't generally practice law. So who exactly is defending climate and public health, and who would be impacted by that defense? Also, another item that I noticed, it centers the urgency around legal fees. I recognize that this is a call for donations, but I think that being able to accurately portray who exactly is doing the defending, who exactly is receiving that defense, and talking about the urgency in a meaningful manner for those people who will most likely be impacted. And Stephanie, we can go to the next one if you like. Another thing to consider is how does this message interact with power? Again, we're in the courtroom setting, and yet somehow the image is rather Arctic. But how might this message reflect how people interact with power? It seems as if they're taking a powerful stance in that they're going into the courtroom, but there's still some images and messaging that kind of leaves a lot to the imagination, and quite possibly would resonate with a very particular constituency of people, maybe lawyers, maybe more fluent people who interact with the law in a positive manner. And again, we've got our polar bears, and my understanding is that they're pretty powerful, but I wouldn't say that they are in the courtroom helping to defend climate. And in the last slide for NRDC, again, the question is, how is the image, how is it portraying power in this messaging? And if anyone has asked a question, I can pause right here. Stephanie, has anyone asked a question that may need a response right now?
No, I was actually going to say, feel free. Don't be afraid of the chat. What makes this session helpful is it being interactive. Everyone checking in, you all have unique positionality on how this shows up and looks like for you. So getting your feedback as we work through these different organizations and campaigns is very helpful. But no one said anything yet in the chat.
Okay. Should I take that personally? Is it that, are they not speaking to us? Are they still there?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so. I just don't necessarily know all the sessions, require folks to be interactive in the chat. But feel free. We're here.
We're here. Okay. Well, then I guess we can keep going. This next image we took from the Nature Conservancy. And I want to just remind everyone, again, no shade to any of the organizations that we're highlighting and lifting up right now. This is an opportunity for all of us to learn. And this session is more about learning from different organizations and their messaging. If the year 2020 and most of 2021 has taught us anything, this has been about grace and for ourselves and others. And so we're lifting these messages up just as examples, and we're all hoping to do better as we move forward. Okay, so this is an image from the Nature Conservancy, and they're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. And I found it interesting that they chose to lift up a butterfly because of its unique migration in North America and in Mexico. And I don't know if anyone has put anything in the chat, but I know that for myself, I was genuinely surprised. I did not realize that butterflies had a Hispanic culture. I'm making a wild assumption and thinking that they just kind of do butterfly stuff, and that's okay. But I think that as we are celebrating cultures, there's really nothing wrong with actually celebrating the people who hold on to that culture. So again, we're asking the question about who exactly are they protecting or celebrating in this case? And obviously this is at the time it was Hispanic Heritage Month, and maybe lifting up the original, how that month of celebration came to be, and we can go to the next one, Stephanie, if you want. Again, just as we're thinking about power in this case, power would be in the celebration. And I would have liked to have seen more of the celebration of the people and in having those images. I think that what could have been powerful is having Latina or Latino folks interacting with the butterfly. Again, celebrating the culture, celebrating nature, celebrating people. It's okay to include people in your messaging. And so again, as we're looking at our messaging notebook, thinking about, what would be the goal of this messaging? Is it to connect with more those who have Hispanic culture? Would it be to celebrate and encourage people to take action on behalf of those people and their care and concern for butterflies? Again, this isn't about shaming anyone. It's really about asking those questions. Who exactly are we hoping to lift up? And what and why and how? Not
yes,
sure.
thank you for that. We have
ahead.
a question in the chat, and I feel like it's a perfect one before we go into the next case study.
Yay.
So the question, I believe the name is Rain. I hope I said that correctly. How do we use thoughtful photos that represent people without leaning too far into tokenism?
That is a great question. And I know that in my thoughts about equity and inclusion, and I'm totally stealing this without giving a reference because I can't remember where I saw it. But when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the context of a party, diversity is inviting someone that isn't like you to the party. Inclusion would be inviting them to dance, and equity would be them picking the music. So I kind of use that as my own little rubric for how are we interacting with people that are not within the dominant culture. And if I would say that, again, just interrogating those questions to yourself. Are you saying, oh, I need a brown person in this shot? Or are you doing what you can to invite them into your movement in a meaningful way, and then collecting an image from that meaningful interaction? I feel like I'm answering your question with a question, so please forgive me. But I'll pause here. Stephanie, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, one, that's a really great answer of the party example. And like, as far as tokenism, if we were to be organizers of that party and make a flyer, if we're choosing the picture of a crowd of folks that we feel like will represent what the crowd is, tokenism will be choosing a picture that you know is not the representation of the folks you invited to the party, right? And that's about making that implicit explicit. It's like, if you are of only invited folks who fit within a certain network and are folks who you are comfortable with, then put the picture on your flyer. Don't present it as anything else. So I would say, like, to just follow along with that example, it's about just giving an accurate example of the movement that you create, and being honest, right? Because that is really what's very problematic for us in this climate movement, is like, Black and brown organizers like Kim and myself and the folks that we support, we often are left putting out the fires that some of our allies and our coalition partners may have started, but by maybe tokenizing or mismessaging. So that's a really great question, Rain, and I hope we answered it.
Yeah, thank you, Rain. Next up, this is an image that we found from Friends of the Earth. So I'll pause for a moment, and I'd love for you to take a moment to take in what this image might say to you right now. Again, keeping in mind that rubric, the who, the what, the where, the how. And when you're ready, Stephanie, we can go to the next slide. So here we are with the who. Would you say that the people who are represented in this picture, that they represent the folks who are most impacted? Probably not. I think that most likely these are the folks that were there at the time of this very important decision, and they have every right to celebrate. But my question would be, how might we, again, as we're doing this work, how might we be more inclusive? Again, inviting folks to this party and inviting them to dance and even picking out the music. And that way, as we're conveying these messages, it is reflective of both the movement and the folks who are most likely to be impacted. I celebrate too. I think that every win against the fossil fuel industry, it should be celebrated. But again, as we think about who should we be connecting with, does this message hit the mark? Next one, Stephanie. And again, as we're thinking about who are in those powerful positions, again, we're all jumping for joy. This is all great. But we've got to do a little better about having those people who are most vulnerable included in these conversations. Okay. Any other questions from the audience or comments?
We had a comment from someone from before around the monarch butterfly, and it says it has an annual migration across Mexico, which I guess was the connection they were trying to make. Yes, we before selecting all of these case studies, we sat down with our comms team and we went through them, and that was something we lifted up. But what was it that our comms team said? There's something you do in comms where you try to connect two things, right? And often you can pull that strand just a little too far where it seems like it's a thin strand that's connecting the two, right? And our folks, we can sense it, right? Like we can sense some of those transactional messaging. And yeah, it's the point they were trying to make.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear from our folks in the audience if they themselves have ever been tokenized, or if they've been left out of conversations or images that they, maybe you were at the party, but no one asked you to dance and you didn't get to pick the music. I know that for myself, I can tell you that I know that I have in various situations, and it doesn't feel good. And I think that part of the work is lifting that up and being really intentional about making sure that it doesn't happen again.
No one has said anything in the chat yet.
Okay, just me. I'm the only one that's ever been tokenized. Okay, that's cool.
No, you're not the only one. I feel like it's very common when we're trying to build diverse movements without being inclusive, that we often move ahead to the brand that we want to have, and it's a process. Someone responded in the chat, Emily, thank you. Maybe not tokenized, but definitely have been acutely aware of being one of the only of a couple of BIPOC people in an almost entirely white org. Yes, thank you for that. That's a lot of emotional stress and baggage, feeling like, one, you have to interject, feeling like there's decisions being made that there's not, an equal diverse amount of votes. But that's also why having a rubric and setting up frameworks that we can hold our organizations and ourselves accountable to are very important, just for our mental health. But thank you for that, Emily. We have Andrea said yes on both. Vivian said yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And I just want to say you're not alone. The reason why we're lifting this up isn't for performative things. It's to know that often in this work, we're secluded and we're siloed in doing this work. And it's important for our white allies to know that we do experience tokenism, even in liberal spaces, even in progressive spaces, even in climate spaces. And we have to make it explicit. But thank you all.
And thank you for, I think it does take a bit of bravery to lift that up, especially in such a public space. And I want to tell you this is a safe space, but that's not my decision that's up to you. But I'm glad that you did. And if I recall correctly, in Netroots, there's an opportunity for us to connect with each other if you wanted to. And I highly encourage it. Like Stephanie said, very eloquently, and I'm using that word very specifically, that, it's important that we connect with each other. This work can feel very siloing, and especially now, as we're connecting virtually, it feels performative. It doesn't feel like we're connecting deeply. So maybe taking that extra effort is that it's worth it, I think. And the reason why I said eloquent earlier is I remember one year before COVID, when we were really interacting in person, I was told by 3 different white men in 3 different events that I was eloquent, well-spoken, and just darn articulate, as if they were just surprised that I could string a few words together. It happens. It's not right. The microaggression is real, and I lean on other Black women and allies to share those thoughts and feelings with. So,
we've had a few more people reply in the chat. Yeah, I wanted to make it explicit that this isn't meant to be in a performative way, but as folks who work virtually and we are people of color, we wanted to also make space for folks to make it explicit, right?
yes.
And then someone shared that the at their previous job that they often had a feeling that they wanted to show representation by having us in the room, but then we were not incorporated into the decision-making process. Right. And that is what is specifically unique about tokenization. It's about like not having power. Like you'll put me on a flyer. You may put me on a brochure. I may be the person talking to the news, but I may not be at the decision-making table. Right. And that's really where tokenism lies, not only in how we show up, but also in the communities we represent. Right. Yes. Thank you for that, y'all.
Yeah.
Okay. You may move to the next one, Kim?
Yeah, we can. And another disclaimer, Stephanie and I are from the South, so we say y'all a lot. Hopefully that's okay with you.
Yeah, we say y'all a lot. And it's, we try to steer for clear girls and guys, All righty. Okay.
Again, taking a moment just to take in this image. And this screenshot comes from the website of Friends of the Earth. Again, no shade on Friends of the Earth, just examining messaging. And so I'll just pause for a moment and let you take that in. So in the picture, which I think is a great picture, and it looks like, the folks who are directly impacted, the Malaysians, are wholly represented in this picture. It would appear all Malaysian folks are here in this picture. But I wanted to draw attention to the headline where the Friends of the Earth are saying that they were there defending the territories and Indigenous people's rights in Malaysia. So going back to the rubric, thinking about who and what are we protecting, right? So it appears that we are protecting land and territories, and that the Friends of the Earth, were providing legal support in that way, which I'm very glad that they did. Thank you so much. But again, as we're looking at this, at the messaging, Stephanie, if you can go to the next one, especially as we think about power. In the headline, it would appear that the Malaysian people, they didn't exercise a whole lot of power in this headline. They're there, thumbs up, standing next to a tree. This is awesome. It's a great image. And unfortunately, I'm sorry, I left this out of the presentation, but further down on the website, there was another picture where it showed the Malaysian people at a decision-making table and having discussions with each other, building power. And unfortunately, that message was not conveyed in this headline. In this headline, it seemed to center the efforts of the Friends of the Earth versus the efforts of the Malaysian people. So again, as we're looking at this rubric, we're asking ourselves, what is the message that we're trying to portray here Are the people interacting with power in a way that they are self-empowering, that they're making change happen for their own community, or are we parachuting in and saving the day? We want to avoid that too. And Stephanie, I think this is where I get off.
Yep. I think that's it.
Okay.
So I just wanted to lift up something about this last one, is that when we went into the page and went through the pictures and the more of the messaging and what the campaign looked like and consisted of, it was a very diverse, inclusive campaign. But sometimes when we're summarizing our work, or sometimes when we pass the baton to our comms team to summarize it up for us, some important words get swapped out, right? And those 1 or 2 word changes can like process how we feel about even clicking into it, right? And so this is a really great example of how the campaign itself can be intentional, it can be equitable, it can be inclusive, but really the one sentence that we use to summarize it extremely. And so when you're doing the self-reflective work, it's okay, right? Like you can be like, hey, I like everything you did, but that word has to go, and like own that unapologetically.
And I'll just add to that. I think that your comms department would appreciate it. You don't know what you don't know, and we're all doing the best we can, and we're all learning every day. If you're doing this work right, you should be learning something new every day. So if you see a message or an image that doesn't really set well with you, I hope that you feel welcome to contact your comms team and push back a little.
Yes, thank you for that, Kim. And while we're talking about pushback, Indigenous Peoples Day is Monday. One of the organizations that we partner with or coalition partners that we partner with and we support are Build Back Fossil Free, which upcoming this week is People versus Fossil Free. So if we were going to do a conversation around people before polar bears, we definitely would need to lift up an Indigenous supported and ran campaign that's going to be kicking off Monday around building back better, building back fossil free, and also just demanding land sovereignty. And so when we talk about this, and if you want to Google it, it's people versus fossil free, fossilfuels.org. And you can go in there. There's a video that I would share that you could watch to lead this next part, but I can't share the video. But it's really great. This is a screenshot from it. And as you're watching it, it's about 1.5 minutes. The question is who? Who do you see in every photo? Who? And how? How are they doing this work? How are they centering themselves? And compared to all the ones that we see before, when you click this video, it's going to give you tingles all over because you're like, wow, this is what transformative work looks like. This is when we let BIPOC folks lead the movement. This is how our videos can make you feel. So not to get all emotional, because Monday's Indigenous Peoples Day, and it always hits me different doing this work in our fight and what we're still having to fight for. But for those of you that want to do a deeper dive and get a video that gives you feels, and you see it all week next week on the news in regards to the actions and things that we're going to be doing, I just wanted to lift this up as something that you'll see that is a really great example of how we need to continue to build our movements. And so as far as takeaways, all right, y'all, BIPOC people prioritize climate issues differently. Okay. Now, you notice I didn't say BIPOC people don't care about climate issues. No, I didn't say that, because that's not true, right? When we think about plastic bags or straws, folks assume turtles and things like that. But when I think about plastic bags, I think of all the women going to church, putting a little plastic grocery bag over their hair and tying it under their shoulders. So when we talk about keeping Tupperware for 15 years, a lot of BIPOC folks are conservationists in that regard, right? So the second part is BIPOC is not a monolith, right? What we started with, there's so many countries and folks and different mixtures of what BIPOC looks like that when we talk about messaging to them, inherently grouping them together is problematic. Okay, and make that explicit with your org. Like, no, maybe we shouldn't be doing BIPOC stuff. Why don't we separate Black? Why don't we separate Indigenous? Why don't we know that people of color is another umbrella term? Be explicit in that. When in doubt, leave it out. If you are creating some messaging and you're like, man, I don't know if I should add this line. It sounds a little hip. Sounds like it's a little culturally Black, which is a new thing in the climate movement, right? Where we use cultural terms that are related to Black culture. If you have to ask yourself multiple times, if you're like, hey, maybe I should have some Black staff or some BIPOC staff review it, leave it out. Okay? And if you're like, hey, it's super problematic for me to leave it out, then you need to build some sort of organizational messaging group that is peers or members that can review it, right? Effective messaging is centered around culturally relevant, accurate communication cues. The reason why I'm putting this in here is around culturally relevant, accurate. Sometimes when it's not our culture, we have stereotypes and biases related to the cultural assumptions, right? And I'm not going to try to go down to a whole nother implicit bias training, but it's important for us to know that effective messaging is us knowing that if I'm doing some campaign that's a culture outside of myself, to know that my privilege and my positionality is inherently problematic. And I need to identify other folks who can make sure that what I'm doing is actually culture relevant and not a stereotype, not an assumption, not rooted in bias. And then lastly, photos are key to our movement, right? But documenting BIPOC folks protesting for environmental justice, climate justice, you have to do it with consent, okay? I know that there's maybe some of you in this chat, and you can +1, +1,000, where you went to a protest, you were invited by someone, and then randomly you end up being the face. You end up being the poster child that the people, because your afro was out, maybe you had some really pretty earrings, whatever it may have been, next thing you know, you are the poster child. We have to stop doing that. Your organizations, like as far as love, I want us to continue to get Black and brown folks to get super involved in this work, but we can't take pictures of people without their consent. That's tokenization, okay? Especially if they haven't opted into your movement. They aren't at the decision-making process. Consent matters. It makes it really hard for us to do this work after you.
And Stephanie,
so I know that was a lot.
You got a many +1s on that one.
Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, so I just want to be cognizant of time. We have 10 minutes left, and I just wanted to open it up to see if any folks had any questions.
Well, it looks like Emily Park, she, and I apologize for using pronouns without checking first, but Emily says, on the flip side, I'm on our org's comm team, and sometimes I get pushback about highlighting BIPOC messaging too much, diluting the climate-centric message. And I'm very disappointed to hear that. I imagine that's very frustrating, Emily. And I hope I'm reading this correctly. I guess the way I'm looking at it, I wish I wasn't in that way, but it sounds like there's been a separation of BIPOC and climate. And I will add to that, that's what the history of this movement, the images that have been portrayed has done, where, and why when I show up to a climate function, I generally get a double take like, oh, hi, Black lady. What are you doing here? And that, it is when we talk about inclusion, right? We're not saying invite the Black people in February. We're not saying, right? We're not saying that we have a particular time and place to be in this movement, but rather we should be in this movement at all times. And maybe that messaging, especially if this is coming out of comms, maybe they've believed the hype before, where it's about polar bears, it's about butterflies, it's about sea turtles, all lovely creatures. However, don't just bring Kim in on February. Kim should be included in all of this, in the messaging and the movement and the decision making. Kim and others. So I'll stop rambling. Stephanie, did you want to add anything for Emily on that?
No, keep doing what you're doing. And it's important to know that, like, the prioritization of certain communities is rooted in systemic racism in America, right? Like, based on zip codes, certain polluters are allowed to do and get incentivized to have industry there, and certain zip codes are protected, right? Like, they're excluded. Part of what we're doing in our work is like calling out the explicitness of the two. So I would say just keep doing what you're doing, Emily. Push that BIPOC messaging, and when in doubt, loop us in. Like, something Kim and we lean into a lot is, if you see other BIPOC people in other spaces doing stuff, you need to say, hey, you know what, let's do a Wednesday webinar. Let's do a combined thing, because I know your organization has some growing to do. My organization has some growing to do. Instead of us owning that sweat equity alone, we can do it together. And it makes it easier, and it also makes it more like we're each other's accountability partners, right? So I just want to share that. Those are some tips that we do to preserve ourselves in this work. So hopefully that's helpful, Emily.
And I want to lift up JL Andrepont. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. They said that they love this, the idea of reimagining what the conversation can be. And I think that speaks to what you just said, Stephanie, about like we could work together on different projects. And when I say could, I actually want to replace that with should. We should be working together. You know, I don't know if you read the IPCC report. It does not look good, and the clock is steadily ticking. And again, we've got to break out of these silos, and we must work together, and it will take all of us to get this work done. So Stephanie, I think I interrupted you. You want to talk about our movement?
Yep, I'll just talk about our movement. So, Mothers Out Front, we are a mother-centered organization that uses the public narrative of mothers to push the powers that be to make sure our children are safe, okay? Just to simplify it all. Now, if you are a mom, you're an auntie mom, you have just young children in your life, we view this movement in 3 buckets. We want to have healthy homes and protect and have accountability in regards to what healthy homes look like. Healthy schools, that can involve electrification of our school bus fleet, down to some of our school districts are working on work around food justice. Then healthy communities overall. This transition from fossil fuels and ensuring that our parks aren't polluted on, right? Like, our kids can play without getting asthmatic triggers. So we break our work into these 3 buckets. I could go into a 10-minute conversation about all the work we do in each one of these buckets, but this is it largely shared with you. So if you're like, hey, this actually sounds great, I like mamas and mama narratives, and I already do work around healthy schools, just reach out to myself or to Kim, and we will just loop you into whatever that is that we're doing. And as we're planning out next year, if there's some partnerships or some coordinated work that you want to do. And then that is all that we have. And we have 5 minutes for any questions or anything like that.
I'm checking the chat now. No questions so far. Give it a moment. Well, I hope this isn't the end of our conversation together. I really appreciate having this time with you all. And Stephanie, it has been a pleasure and an honor co-facilitating with you. I'm going to go ahead and name you the MVP here. I appreciate you and all the work you do. I appreciate all of you and all the work that you do. I just tell you all to hang in there. Again, this work isn't easy, and we should be working together and leaning on each other. Again, thank you for coming, And I don't know about Stephanie, this was my first Netroots facilitation. So I was super nervous, and I'm very glad that everyone participated so wholly in it. Again, this is Stephanie and Kim from Mothers Out Front, and this has been the talk about people over polar bears and figuring out how we can examine those communication standards and create a new one. So again, we're here if you have any questions. And I guess with that, we can say goodbye.
Yes, unless you had an amazing takeaway that you just wanted to share with us. You're like, oh, when you said that, made my heart melt. That will be great, just so we can continue to build on this. Thank y'all.
Thank you.